You're a co-host.
Fabulous. All right. Can everybody see that? Start from the beginning. Here we are. All right, everyone can see it. Awesome. Okay. So today I'm talking about recovering our roots, Salish ethnobotanical knowledge for community well-being. It's really big passion project of mine, and I'm really excited to share it with all of the botanists across Montana today. So we did have a little bit of this information in the introduction. I just wanted to add on that if you're interested in reading my master's thesis, which really encapsulates a lot of what I'll be talking about today, it's called Recovering Our Roots, the Importance of Salish Ethnobotanical Knowledge and Traditional Food Systems to Community Wellbeing on the Flathead Indian Reservation. If you don't have access, I guess, to like university servers or online libraries or things like that, I always have copies available if you would like one, just because I think that if everybody could read it, that would be great. I would appreciate it. Currently, since I am an alumni of the 500 Women Scientists Fellowship for the Future, they just brought in a new cohort, which is really exciting. My current work is with Indigenous Pact. We are a company that works with different tribal nations in issues of health and healthcare. Our mission is to improve health equity for Native Americans and Alaska Natives in one generation. And so I'm really excited to kind of bring all of my work with food systems and Indigenous health full circle to make sure that we're amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples, but also serving them adequately within our health and healthcare delivery. So I really love to start off these presentations, and if you've seen a presentation from me, some of this is going to be very similar, and I hope you don't get bored. But I love to start off with this land map. I understand that we have people coming from all over for this presentation today, not just Montana, but it's the native land map, and it covers the entire world actually, but I just chose this little snippet because this is kind of where we're all primarily located. And it showcases the Indigenous tribal territories and how many tribal nations kind of use different landscapes or understood them or had relationships with them. So you can see a lot of overlap, which is really cool because it just shows you that these ideas about borders and the creation of kind of these lines and maps weren't really how Native societies function. We're very, fluid people, and we shared similar territories, but it's also really good for all of us to see right now the traditional territory that we are residing on, wherever we may be. It's also really crucial that showcases the use of water and how water is included in the landscapes of how Native peoples understood the environment and created relationships within that. So I know this is the Montana Native Plant Society, so I feel like a lot of you will know this. But if you would like to indulge me, how many of you know what ethnobotany is? And you can just like press the little icon and it like raises your little hand, your emoji hand. Yeah, I can see it. I can see when people raise their hand. 4 participants raise their hand. 7 participants. Ooh, 10. Ooh, we're climbing up. There's a lot of people here today. And I love that we have a lot of people that know what ethnobotany is. It's great to present to botanists because I think you guys will understand that my struggle as an ethnobotanist is that a lot of people think I know about all the plants in like one area. And in reality, I probably know maybe 2 or 3 of them because those are the plants that are in my area of study. So with that, ethnobotany is the scientific study of traditional knowledge and customs of people concerning plants and their many uses in a society. it's a combination of ethnography, which is the study of customs of people and cultures, very based in anthropology and history, and then the scientific study of botany. So that is really just honing in on plant physiology, ecology, classification, habitats, propagation, a whole bunch of very science-based ways of knowing a plant. So in ethnobotany specifically, we're studying how plants have been utilized for various things in cultures and societies. And across the world, historically and currently, plants have been utilized for food, shelter, medicines, as well as ceremonial and religious purposes in many different places. And for Indigenous groups specifically, plants made up a huge bulk of a lot of our traditional ecological knowledge. I deal specifically with food plants, so that's plants that were utilized for food or for teas or processing food. But I do know that the Salish utilize hundreds of plants with tools and medicines and time markers, things like that. So I kind of really want to center us in space and time here and just show kind of where we're starting from. This is a map, and it highlights the traditional territories of many of the tribes in Montana, even though it's what we see here is what we now call Montana, right? When all of these tribes were utilizing this landscape, there was not these constructed borders or anything like that. But it just goes to show you how wide of a range a lot of these tribes had for foraging and hunting and trading, and kind of what happened to that land base once the creation of treaties happened, and Native tribes were removed, relocated, and settled on reservations throughout the state. So the little blue section is where the traditional territory of the Pend Oreille and the Salish is, but it's, shown in some historical records and some stories that the Salish people traveled all over the state. There's records of them being like as far as Big Timber and Livingston for trading, as well as going westward or even north, kind of in the areas of the Pacific Northwest, what is now Idaho, Washington, potentially even in Canada. And for those of you that don't know, the Salish tribe located in Montana, they're called the Interior Salish because they are the Salish band that is located most inland in the country. So the Salish are part of a larger Salesian-speaking language family, and this language family had a bunch of different bands, and you'll see that in areas across the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of those tribes over there are sister tribes to the Interior Salish, but there are Salish people all over the coast, Pacific Northwest, as well as Canada, and we're just the ones that are most inland. So that's why we're called the Interior Salish band, and the language is the Interior Salish dialect. This excerpt is from the Salish people and the Lewis and Clark expedition, and just kind of shows how the landscape was going to change way back in time. Of course, there were some Western influences that have come into the territory a little bit before that, but Lewis and Clark kind of made this big impact on just what the changes were going to happen with the Salish people and the way that they live their lives, which is very much centered around the seasonal round, this kind of picture I have here in the corner. So the months, the 12-month calendar, I mean, that's a very new kind of Western way of telling time. We adopted it because, you know, we're like modern peoples, but each month is marked by different ecological happenings. So we have a month for the buttercup, the month for bitterroot and camas. We have months for celebration, months for coming together, telling stories, things like that. But I believe prior to the, you know, this 12-month calendar, the Salish people really understood time by these ecological time markers, as well as the passing of the seasons. So a lot of the way that our worldview is been shaped has been the comings and goings of different plants as well as animals. And both of those things are very important to our relationship with the landscape and our relationship to ourselves. Our creation story tells us that the animals and the plants were here long before human beings were created. And that they made this landscape habitable for us. And so we don't forget that. And that's why it's important for us to maintain and establish these relationships to this day. Lastly, I just want to talk about the name that the Salish people call themselves. A lot of tribal nations have their own names for what they call themselves, rather than other names that maybe have been placed on them, or even misnomers. Like Flathead. Flathead is a very big misnomer for the Salish people, and was from Lewis and Clark. But what we call ourselves is Skelch, and Skelch is a combination of two words. It's Skelch, which is meat, and Stulich, which is land. And when you loosely, you know, put that together, it's flesh of the earth and meat of the land. And I think a lot of tribal names reflect kind of these similar tendencies, is that we are very much a part of the landscape, and the landscape is very much a part of us. Okay, so why did I make this jump from political science to ethnobotany and environmental studies? Well, in my undergraduate studies, I really wanted to understand the barriers that had been placed on Indigenous peoples, separating them from their traditional foodways, and overall what impact that had on their health. There are a lot of chronic illnesses in our communities. American Indians and Alaska Natives have some of the highest rates of chronic illnesses, such as diabetes and obesity, heart disease, childhood obesity, depression, things like that. And, you know, these were things that I saw in my own community, and I really wanted to understand why that was. And it's important to recognize historical context, because you know, our disease patterns follow many of the disease patterns of Indigenous peoples across the world. It starts with infectious diseases, which wiped out a majority of our populations, followed by malnutrition. And then once we hit this kind of assimilation, removal, relocation periods, we get the obesity, the cancer, the heart disease, the diabetes, and the depression. And it's really funny if you look at like different terms, like linguistically, you know, we didn't have a lot of words for these types of chronic illnesses in our vocabulary until very recently. We had to create those words for those illnesses themselves. So because we have such high rates of these diseases, you know, I wanted to know the political, social, economic infrastructures and systems that were placed upon us for us to get to that point. And a lot of them are linked to nutritional deficiencies, as well as different lifestyle changes, historical trauma, things like that. And to continue with this kind of this root of this issue, the removal and the relocation of tribal peoples from their traditional territories to someplace new in a smaller land base has a big impact, as well as the assimilation to American or westernized ways of living. You're taking hunting and gathering societies and putting them in a totally different world and expecting them to, well, I don't know if the government was expecting us to flourish. Maybe that wasn't really the intention. And, we struggle. And so all of these issues with health equity in Indigenous peoples is affected by these social determinants of health. So overall, this transition from traditional food practices that had been in place since pretty much time immemorial, and then you add American lifestyle, sedentary, we're not eating traditional foods, we're eating, foods that biologically our bodies are like, what the heck is flour? And then a wage economy, we have that decline of traditional food knowledges and practices and those subsequent health issues that still exist today. So I do believe it's really important to focus a little bit on that historical context, because I think a lot of people don't understand, how we got to this point and how much of our history has shaped where we are today. But I also, that's not the focus of my work right now. It's how can we utilize positive cultural relationships to bring back our health, to bring back our culture, to utilize kind of these more traditional methods of practicing health and wellness for ourselves to flourish and for the landscape to flourish. So I choose ethnobotany because it's a way for me to have that impact. Salish people are still hunting and we're still fishing. So we're still practicing those parts of our traditional food systems. But traditional plant knowledge isn't as widely practiced in our communities today. And the Salish, again, utilize hundreds of plants. So where is that knowledge going? How can we bring it back to the fabric of society? And how can we continue to have it flourish for the next generations? Also, I'm sure a lot of you will understand this. Plants are way cooler than I feel like I could be in my lifetime, because I can't make my own food and stay in one spot, and I can't evolve to have pretty hair and I don't know, pretty features to have other natural beings do my bidding and things like that. So plants are incredible, and I just became really fascinated with them over the past couple of years. So I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to look at plants and just study them and love them and understand the relationships that we have with them. And then also, I just want to point out that a lot of the photographs that are in this presentation are all taken by me. So these are all my pictures of different Salish food plants in their various stages of growth, because that is important for the research that I did. So circling back to, we talked about the history and then what's the next step. I firmly believe that food is medicine, and food can be a way for us to bring this knowledge back, because everybody needs food. And there's something about food in Indigenous communities that really just brings everybody together. So small amounts of traditional food consumption can improve diet quality, but they also have just so much social and cultural benefits through their plant-human interactions. So it's not just about, the nourishment aspect. When you break it down to macronutrients and vitamins and all of that, the plants have all those already, but it's about the nourishment of the body and the soul and all of the things that come with engaging with our traditional food plants. And if we have a decrease in that transmission of knowledge about those plants and how to find them and how to process them, that obviously affects how it gets used. And so if we don't learn this knowledge and we don't continue it on, we could lose our relationship to these plants forever. which is not what I want to see happen. So you think about all the things that are tied into our foods, it's language, it's culture, it's traditional teachings on being, on the land. It's about relationships that we have with ourself, with our family, with our tribe, our community. And so we have to continuously renew those relationships. And this picture is of cooked camas bulbs. Cooking camas is like a really labor intensive, but a labor of love, a labor intensive process. And we cook them with Brioria Fremonti, black lichen. And it creates this beautiful dish that we have here, which is just like caramelized camas bulbs and lichen. Who would have thought? It's also really important for me as a Salish woman to continue this legacy of traditional plant knowledge in Salish society. Women were keepers of a lot of knowledge about certain plants. There are stories. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but if you look it up, the story of the Bitterroot and the Salish people, if you look that up on Google, there's a couple things that come up. There's some videos. There's also a link to like actual flip book, and it'll just show you like how plants revealed themselves to women, and women became the caretakers of that particular plant. Bitterroot is one of them. Camas is one that is traditionally taken care of by women as well. But the lineage, the line of powerful Salish women who essentially held their societies up through gathering and through having this knowledge, feeding, nurturing, that's really important to continue for me, but also to make sure that, we are aware of that. We're aware that women's roles were equally as important as male roles, and that our knowledge is super important to the tribe as a whole. So, and this is stuff that I've been, growing up doing, digging Bitterroot, and my mom would take me to the Bitterroot feast, or doing a camas bake, or picking huckleberries. Like these are critical, important parts of my childhood that I didn't realize was like training me to be a Salish woman ethnobotanist until I was older. And it's incredible the amount of knowledge and the beautiful, powerful women that helped me along this journey. So I also want to talk about research. I mean, I know this is a presentation about plants, but I also think it's important that in the research of plants, especially when you're dealing with Indigenous communities, there's a lot of space for that knowledge to be abused or taken advantage of or anything like that. And historically, that has happened to a lot of tribal people. And that was something that I never wanted to do in my research. So I, did all of these steps to make sure that Salish people were active, autonomous beings in this entire process of me doing my research on Salish plant knowledge. And I focused on food because that was a great way to get everybody involved, but also medicines, like that's just a whole nother level of knowledge that really could be abused and misused. And so I thought food was the best way to approach what I wanted to do. But so you have to get prior and informed consent. Sometimes you have to go through an institutional review board. I had to go through my culture committee, the Salish Kalispel Culture Committee. It's about having stake in the community. And as an Indigenous researcher and as a Salish woman, I have stake in my community. And it's important for me to acknowledge all of that and make sure that people know that Indigenous knowledge is not just, for taking. It's about having people be active in that research and in those studies. This is also something I came up with in my master's research, and again, reflects how important it is to make sure that when we're talking about Indigenous peoples, it's about from their own perspective. So I asked people what they thought it meant for them to be healthy and well in regards to traditional plant knowledge. And Western medicine tends to think about health and wellness as being, you know, my body is operating correctly. I don't have disease. I'm not sick. That's how I know I'm healthy. But if you look at it from this Indigenous lens, well-being and health is infused with culture. It's infused with language, and it's infused with traditional plant knowledge. When we go out and we're engaging on the landscape, you know, there's a whole other set of positive benefits that we're getting. We're walking on the land, so that's, you know, that's physical, but then, you know, we're engaging in a practice that our ancestors practice. We're engaging with something that reminds us of our grandma. We're, you know, speaking to our plants in our language. It's just all of these components that bring it together, that show that health and wellness is not just this kind of like one-sided, kind of more scientific way of looking at it. It's a lot of these other things, and you can't really separate them. And also in my study, I'm really interested in linguistics. And I think if I got another master's, I might do Salish linguistics because it's super, super interesting. So if you look at plant names, and I have a lot of people ask me this, you know, what's the meaning of this plant name? Like, how do you break it down? What does it mean? All these things. And I really can't tell you because I don't think they can be broken down. You know, having talked with some linguists and some language learners in my research, there's not really a way to break it down. And in the study of linguistics, if a word is not analyzable into a original root or meaning, it's either very old or it's borrowed from another language. Seeing as this is pretty similar across the board with other Salish languages, I would say it's because it's very old. So all of these plants have existed, you know, for as long as we have thought they've existed. And I just think that's incredible, that we've had this relationship with these beings for so long. So these are plant names of traditional food plants that I haven't really found to be analyzable. We are looking into Glacier Lily and Yellow Bell, though. There might be something with their similar roots, but still trying to uncover that. But then, you know, there's a couple that are analyzable. And I think some of those give rise to what the plant is used for. So phoneberry is called hosum, and hos means phone, to phone. And the way that Salish people ate phone berries is we would put them in a bowl with some water and we would whip them up really fast, and it would make like this foam, and people would eat it. And a lot of Salish people really like to eat it. Phone berries are very bitter, but it's like part of that, you know, that ancestral connection. So just understanding these levels of Indigenous knowledge bases and our language and how we see plants from this point of view just gives you a whole nother perspective. These are just some of the foraging tenets that I think are important to highlight. And these can apply to food and medicine and tools, but these are all important ways that we can approach having relationships to plants. Since I'm sure most of you are in plant societies across the state, you know, these are some of the ways that, and if you aren't already, or if you are, that's great, just how you can have reciprocal, balanced relationships. And these are some things that we've been taught in our foraging practices, you know, our whole lives. We acknowledge that the grizzly bear eats glacier lilies for important food source. So, you know, we're not going to take all the glacier lilies in this one area because we know that it's needed by another being. Likewise with, you know, berries, we don't overpick one area. We usually go from area to area so that the plants have an opportunity to repropagate the next season. So it's taking what you need and never more, but also respecting the place that you are. I just want to remind everybody that foraging, if you like foraging, you have to check about foraging in certain areas. So, I mean, that just means like checking the federal, state, or tribal laws about foraging in particular areas, because tribal nations are sovereign nations and they have the ability to make their own laws and policies. And so it's important for people to honor that, especially when it comes to foraging. So for CS and KT, you can't forage on tribal lands unless you're a enrolled member or married to an enrolled member or have an enrolled member with you. So like a lot of the foraging I do with my mom, because she's an enrolled member. And so there's a lot of, you know, layers to that. But these are some things that I think that a lot of people can benefit from. And these are on my website as well, if you kind of want to read more into them, or if you have any questions on them. Okay. Just so I know for time, we have this hour and then like 30 minutes for questions, or is it like everything's in this 1 hour?
Oh, no, we have plenty of time, Rose. Well, you take your time on the presentation and then we'll see what we have for questions. So take your time.
Thanks, everyone. So I don't know if I'll get anybody on these, but just so I can take like a sip of water. And if you guys want to put this in the chat, like how many of these plants do you think are edible? Go. All right, I'm gonna see the chat. Okay, we got a lot of people replying. I should make these harder, or maybe people have caught on to my sneakiness. So for everybody that's replying all, you are correct. All of these plants are edible. And all of these plants are known by the Salish, and have been a part of my study. And like, you know, like I said, I mean, we can go through them if you want. The Glacier Lily is edible. You can eat the bulb. If you want, you could eat the flower heads. They look really pretty in a salad. I've tried the leaves before. You can eat the leaves, but like if you eat too many, you get that sensation when you eat too much pineapple, where it's like burning your tongue. So I wouldn't recommend like eating a whole boatload of it, but it's tasty if you're on a trail or something. And then we have wild onions, the nodding onion, right there next to it. That is a popular bulb that we like to put in our camas bakes, alongside the camas and the lichen. It just makes everything kind of taste a little bit better. I also like to use these just in cooking in the summer generally. Then we have some elderberries. A lot of that is being more used now because immunity, people are using it for syrups and all sorts of things because of COVID. So that's one kind of like food medicine thing that's been used. And then of course we have the Bitterroot, which is the Montana state flower, and everybody loves it because it looks gorgeous when it blooms. but it's actually not a viable food source when it's blooming, because all of the energy in its roots is going to make this bloom. And so the Salish people eat the roots. The roots is the primary food source. And we harvest when the leaves are really succulent, kind of in that early spring area. It's one of the first staple foods to really emerge after a hard winter. So that's another reason why it's really, really important. So if you see some bitterroot leaves, some succulent little bitterroot leaves, make sure to, watch your step. Because that's one of our food sources, and it's still pretty available in some areas, not all of them. There's development and such. And then we have kinnikinnick. Most popularly used by tribes for drying the leaves and putting in smoking pipes, but the berries, they are not, juicy or sweet like many of the other berries that we know. But kinnikinnick berries, you can pick them, and Salish people would like heat them up. The more modern method is to like put them in a pan and like toast them, and so they kind of like puff up, kind of like you do puff grains or something like that. They actually kind of taste like a very fragrant, like small mealy apple. I don't know if that's appetizing at all, but if you want to try it, you could. And then we got arrowleaf balsam root. So this was one just kind of like a snack food. When the stems are very tender, you can peel off the outer layer and then just kind of eat that soft inner core. It's pretty good. I enjoy it. It's a tasty spring treat. Thimbleberries, which is actually one of my favorite berries. I mean, everybody's like, oh, I love the huckleberry, blah, blah, blah. I mean, huckleberries are great. But the thimbleberry is where it's at. And it's called a thimbleberry because you pick it, and then you put it on your thumb or something, like a little thimble. But it also just tastes really good. And it's an incredible snack when you've been hiking all day, because it's just like a jacked up raspberry. And I love thimbleberries. And then we have this kind of blurry picture of a yellow bell. That's actually one of my favorite spring treats, because you dig up the corm underneath, and you can saute it with butter and salt and pepper, and it's super good. It's very tasty. I think traditionally we just boiled them. Boiling was a very common cooking method back then. Or people would put them in steaming pits. But yellow bell corms are super yummy, and I really like to pick them in the spring. So those are just a few of the traditional food plants that we use. This running list of them, because I am not an expert, but because I'm learning new stuff every single day about different plants that we use. But this was just a way of conglomerating kind of all of the food plants that I've studied. And so we have the Latin name, the common name, and the Salish name. And it was really important for me in my research to make sure that we showcase the botanical aspects, but also the Salish cultural knowledge aspects, because common names they can like be very confusing. There's like 6 different names for amelanchier, or like sarvisberry, or savisberry, or juneberry, or saskatoon. But if you can get the species name correct, then you're pretty set. So I understand that botany has a really good way of telling me, the identifying aspects and the important ways that, I can really positively know this plant by its physiology or its identifying features. But the cultural aspect just brings in another layer of knowing this plant intimately that I think is important for not just my research, but the resources I put out. So when I build my resources for my website or anything like that, I make sure to add the important botanical aspects alongside the cultural components, because they can feed off of each other in a way that can just make them an incredible tool for Salish people, and Indigenous people across the state. But then, so we have major food plant categories within this list. So we have roots and shoots and berries and nuts, although I think we only use like one nut, and it's the white bark pine nut. Fungus, bark, the inner cambium layer of trees in the spring is known to be a very tasty treat. And then we have just the groupings of our plants based on their usage. So like primary plants are going to be the ones that were harvested in large amounts. They could be traded. They could be processed and stored for winter, so people didn't go hungry. They're really big, important plants. That's your like camas, that's your berries, that's your bitterroot, those types of things. And then you have your secondary plants. So maybe things like the yellow bells or glacier lilies or spring beauties that aren't maybe used as much because they can't be stored as well, but still important. Beverage plants are, things used for teas, wellness teas, mint, wild mint is really tasty. And then there's preservation plants, which was really cool for me to uncover. So Salish people would take like bee balm or wild mint and dry it, and then they would sprinkle it over like choke cherry patties or even like dried meat or fish to kind of ward off the bugs. And that was a way of helping to preserve this other food source for later on. So those are all the different ways that we can use food plants, and just, a handful of some of them that have been used. So in the essence of this entire presentation, I just want to show that plants can provide a healthier future for the Salish people in a lot of different aspects than just, physical wellness. It connects us to a lot of components of our own culture and our own history. It's taking us to creation. It's honoring our oral history, our language. When we have relationships with plants, it nourishes us, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. And it connects us and it grounds us and it helps us with our identity. And I think, there are a lot of social, cultural benefits that could come from having these relationships. And if you guys aren't familiar, traditional ecological knowledge refers to the evolving knowledge acquired by Indigenous and local peoples over hundreds of thousands of years through direct contact with the environment. I like to think that Indigenous peoples were like OG scientists, because we were practicing science every single day in the ecological environment. We were observing, we were having questions, we were, performing experiments or however you want to call it. But all of this body of knowledge that we carry with us today was acquired through having deep, intimate relationships with the environment. We are part of the environment. We're not separate from it. So our traditional ecological knowledge is reflected in place names. The place name for Missoula is Insha'achstem, or a place of the little bull trout, because Salish people fish for bull trout in the river. And the Clark Fork River was called Inmesalutquot, Inmesolutque. And I think the term Missoula came from Inmesolutque, which was our name for the Clark Fork River. Mesulet. Yeah, I'm just going to say that so it makes sense. And then, you know, we have stories that tell us how to process the plants, where they came from, you know, what animals taught us how to use them, things like that. Observation of animals taught us what was edible and what to stay away from. I mean, we hold grizzly bears and bears in high regard because they're omnivores as well. And so I feel like a lot of what we learned came from them. Our foraging methods also seek to facilitate future growing for plants through soil turnover. A lot of our tools, the tools that we use for digging up camas bulbs or any sort of bulbs, they're called petses. They do a really good job of just not like destroying the entire soil, but actually help with soil turnover. So there's a lot of methodologies within Indigenous foraging practices that have been shown through Western science to be important and critical to the health of the environment. This is just a photo I like to show. Anybody know where that is? Does that look familiar to some people? I see some questions. Yeah, so that is, that's where the University of Montana is currently sitting. And that was a Salish camp that was in that area. And the Salish, you know, utilized that area and, oh my gosh, what is the name of that? I haven't been to Missoula in a while. Mount Jumbo. Is it Mount Jumbo? Mount Sentinel. There we go. The Mount Sentinel area is just like was known to have incredible bitterroot blossoms and bitterroot, you know, growing there. I mean, you could still see it when you hike, but of course, because there's been a lot of people in that area, there's less and less bitterroot. But those were some of the areas that we went because we knew that they were, you know, full of bull trout and full of bitterroot and full of these things that were important to our seasonal round. So I think that's just, you know, a really cool way to showcase, you know, our history is longstanding in these areas. So great. Oh, perfect timing. I just want to close with this kind of new endeavor that I'm working on. It's called the Salish Plant Society. It's a way for me to get resources and you know, start community forums and get Salish people engaged with this knowledge base that's kind of in a more accessible format. So it's a web page. If you go to salishplantsociety.com, it's up and running. It's sort of bare bones right now, but I hope to upload more content about, you know, Salish ethnobotany and what is traditional ecological knowledge, and how has you know, traditional food plants been studied to impact health or nutritional content and recipes and all sorts of stuff up there. And if you are interested also in becoming a part of the listserv, because I'll send out emails about, you know, hey, this is up on the blog today. You can email me at rose@salishplantsociety.com. I love this logo so much. I don't know if y'all know all the plants in this, but it was designed by another Salish lady, and she did a great job. And these are just some of the goals of the Salish Plant Society. It's to have an increase in Salish citizen knowledge, access, and engagement with traditional food plants, and to contribute to the traditional food plant knowledge of the Salish community, and have it be an active resource for people to engage with that body of knowledge, and, you know, hopefully couple generations down the line, people are still utilizing it and people are still foraging and practicing these things. So these are just some resources and ways to connect with traditional ecological knowledge and ethnobotany. I saw somewhere in the chat, people were reading Braden Sweetgrass. Dr. Kimmer is incredible. She's what sparked my my just immense curiosity about plants in general. And then Rosalind Lapierre, she was my thesis advisor, and she's an incredible Blackfeet ethnobotanist as well. There's also some folks that are doing cooking as a form of Indigenous reclamation of food sources. And then just like some really great, there's some great Indigenous people working on this type of stuff out there. You can participate in the living culture of plants. There's some ways there. You can grow your own garden. All sorts of cool things. Those are the plants I like to use when I am out in the field. And I think we're good. I think we made it. So thank you everyone for listening to my presentation, and I'm really excited to listen to your questions.
Thank you so much, Rose. We really do appreciate your covering the historical context as well as all of your plant work. I did put salishplantsociety.com in the chat for people, and Andrew Smith also shared a link to Rose's thesis. You can see that in there. And you can check out other programs of Rose's online, but you can sign up for her newsletter on her website. So do type your questions into the chat. We have some coming in, and I'll go ahead and start addressing those now. Bear with me while I scroll back here. Someone did ask about, it must have been on your slide, but is biscuit root very common? And then some other people were striking, adding in where they see it, but.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see.
There you go.
See everything now. Yeah, so we used biscuit roots, and honestly, I am still like trying to learn about the lomatiums because they're very hard, me personally, to identify and differentiate, but I believe that the Salish people understood a handful of the lomatian species, one of them being biscuit root, and got its name biscuit root. I don't know, maybe from the Salish, maybe from other tribes, but you dig up the root and you dry it, and then you pound it into a flour, and then later on that flour was mixed with water to make a biscuit, and so hence the name biscuit root. But those are pretty prevalent in the areas around Flathead, but then I know they're in other areas across the state as well. So yes, biscuit roots and other lomatiums were pretty used by most tribes.
Yes, great. All right, Barbara says she knows that early peoples were selecting plants which they knew would treat their maladies, such as headaches, but she's curious about their level of understanding about which plants were providing them with, for instance, more energy.
Interesting question. You know, I don't know. I've always been interested in the types of beverages that Indigenous people used prior to, you know, the introduction of coffee or like caffeinated tea. I feel like I've heard of some that have been used that have been known to have, you know, some energy inducing qualities, but also I guess that kind of falls more in the realm of some medicinal things. And unfortunately, I am not super well versed in kind of medicinal components of plants, just because that wasn't my upbringing, but also it can be very tricky. Medicine can be very, very tricky.
Yeah, all right. How about what tools or techniques do you use to help promote more native plants?
So one of the really common ones that Salish people have used is, so when the camas flower, the blue camas flower dries up, it has these kind of cute little seed pods, and you can rattle them around, you can hear them, and they're shaking. But Salish women, some of my aunties have said they just take the seed pod and they just sprinkle it around the area that the camas is in. And they had been taught to do that for a while, so that, there's some seed propagation there. Some other ways is that any sort of like root that we dig up, we always try to take the flower head or the leaves or anything like that and put it back in the ground, just because, to return that plant back to the soil, in the hopes that it will repropagate. We do that a lot with the bitterroot tops. We were always taught to take the leaves and such and put them back in the ground.
Great. Yeah. And we're getting lots of thank yous for sharing your culture and knowledge. And Mary Ellen loves your logo, as do others. And she sees bitterroot, kinnikinnick, and she's wondering about some of the other plants. So.
Oh, okay. So the logo has the bitterroot flowers, and then, the succulent bitterroot in the middle, because that's the most important. We have camas, the blue camas, and in the back, actually are chokecherry flowers. They grow in these really beautiful white bunches, and I really love them. And then actually on the left are the foam berries, Shepherdea canadensis. And I made sure to tell her about I noticed that some of them have little yellow spots. They have little speckles of yellow on them, and that helps me identify them. So I made sure to put those in the logo. And so those are the plants in our Salish Plant Society logo.
Nice. Let's see. I wonder if you know of spruce tea and its high level of vitamin C.
Yes, I had a newsletter. Part of my stuff during COVID, and part of my fellowship was I did biweekly newsletters. And so, yes, spruce tips, the like bright green, beautiful ones, called Nature's Gatorade. And you can just I think they're really high in vitamin C and have some electrolytes. And so they're also just really tasty to eat as is, but you can infuse them with water and stuff. I like them. They're good.
Nice. And Shane wonders if there might be any chance you'd be willing to pronounce some of the Salish names for a few of maybe the favorite plants that you shared.
Sure. Bitterroot is Specum, camas Sali, but cooked camas is called Itwe. Let's see, foam berries, wholesome, huckleberries, the Shah, thimbleberries are pulpkin. My favorite choke cherries are cho. The Salish language is very, very consonant heavy, but we love it. Berries just generally are called spikashk, which means it has something to do with the ripeness, the readiness of the berry. Arrowleaf balsam root is mshtwet. This is good for me because I made it a goal for me to memorize the Salish names of them, and I'm getting through it. Those are just a couple, to name a few, and I'm hoping later on on the website is to have some pronunciation guides and maybe just some Salish speakers saying the names so we can kind of hear them a little bit more.
Great idea. Yeah. So Catherine, thanks you for sharing so beautifully and concisely about these human-plant relationships. As a non-Native American, what are some of the best ways to support your efforts of remembering and strengthening Salish relationships with their plants?
I think honestly, if I don't know if you know Salish people, tell them about this, but also, part of forming these relationships and getting more Indigenous people involved is just like leaving space for them to do so. So just kind of honoring any sort of like, foraging, tribal foraging laws or anything like that. Making sure that you're kind of aware of your surroundings when you go hiking. I mean, part of the reasons why some of our known areas for foraging are just have totally gone down in their plant populations because of development and building and stuff like that. And I don't know how much influence most people have on that, but protecting rich ecological environments is really important. And that can be watersheds, that can be wetlands. Wetlands are super important for chemists, mountains, like all sorts of things. I think it really just involves us being better stewards to the environment. And that's something non-natives and natives can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Jacob asks, do you have a feel for how often seed was collected and used to propagate food plants by the Salish?
Good question, Jacob. That I don't know. I've always wondered, like, when the Salish were involved in trade networks, was seed collecting a part of that? Was seed saving, seed collecting a part of what we did? Or was it more about management of ecological environments and having practices within those? So that's a good question for me to kind of dig into a little bit more, as I have been curious about seed saving, particularly for the Salish. I know some more agricultural Indigenous societies use seed saving, but I'm not sure about ours.
Yeah. And Christy's asking, do you ever use silver buffalo berry, which is Shepherdea argentea? I think it was only native east of the divide, she says.
Yeah, the first time I came across the silver buffalo berry was like, I was just like driving through Wyoming, coming into the eastern side of the state, and I was like, whoa, that looks like foamberry. But then they have they have thorns, prickles. They have they have thorns. And so I was like, oh, this isn't it, because the shepherd, the foamberry I know, like, doesn't have thorns. But I have known some tribal nations in the east to use that berry as well. I don't know if it does the same as foam berries, but they are in the same family. So,
All right. Sarah's wondering about the traditional vessel for boiling water and how often were boiled foods parts of diets?
I would say boiled foods were probably a big part of the diets, because there were a lot of things that weren't digestible raw. So the way to boil them, or the way to like cook them, would be to boil them. But I think steaming was probably an easier way if you couldn't get a vessel. And again, I'm not super well versed in like tools and tool making. So maybe they had like, I don't know, a parfleche bag, or maybe some sort of stone or something. But we would steam things in steaming pits by heating up hot rocks and then kind of putting a layer on the bottom and then covering them with some other plant materials, and then we could lay the things that we want to steam on top of them. So I would say steaming primarily, but then I think boiling was the next step. But I don't know what they were boiled in.
Good question. Yeah. All right. Is there a good website or app you know of to find edible or medicinal plants? And I think you do have some of that on your website, but maybe you want to mention something.
I have not found an app particularly. I think some of them, like if you take a picture, like on iNaturalist or iSeek, you take a picture and then sometimes in the comments, it'll be like, this is edible. But for most of the ways that I've found plants to be edible is either through like family knowledge or in books. So a lot of it came from the books that I have listed on the resource page on my website. And that's where a majority of my knowledge came from, is like some of those books. So no apps yet. Maybe someone should develop it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of a slippery slope, huh? And Rachel says, as she understands it, there are some very disjunct bitterroot populations east of the mountains. There is speculation that those were cultivated by roots, presumably not through seeds. Is there oral history of vegetative propagation by the Salish?
So I have no idea if this is scientifically proven. Doesn't make it any less important, but when we dig bitter roots in the spring, there is a component inside of the bitterroot, and we call it the bitterroot heart. And if you open up the little fleshy part, it's got this little like red seed, it's like this red thing, and we always take the heart and we put it back in the ground. And that was another one of those methods that we were just taught to return it back to the soil. But as far as like other repropagation techniques, like some things like the yellow bell bulbs, they have these little bulbets on them, and those could also be spread out to repropagate again in other areas. And other Salish tribes have used this method to repropagate similar Fritillaria species. So yeah, those are just some of the ones I know.
Great. And Sandra says she wishes she knew how to say thank you in Salish, because you've so beautifully shared. And I see you typed it into the chat. And then perhaps here's a good last question. Do you take monetary donations to the Salish Plant Society? Is that available?
That is not available. I don't know how to approach that one yet, because we're not like part of our plant knowledge and the wariness of academics coming in and asking for it and all of that, is that a lot of them made a profit off of it and didn't really return it back to the Salish people or any Indigenous people when they did that. So I don't know if the Salish Plant Society would take money. I think this is more just for sharing and all of that. But one of my future ideas is to do like some sort of community project where I get like different native plants and have Salish people that want to have them in their yards. So, I mean, maybe eventually down the line, I'll probably need grant funding for that to get those plants and get those supplies. But at the moment, no. But thanks.
Great. Oh, and Sandy's wondering about any plants we should know not to harvest because their population is too low.
I mean, I know the bitterroot has dwindled down quite a bit in like the Missoula area, but I also don't know very many people that would dig up a bitterroot for like, for funsies. But I don't know, is there like some examples? I think maybe just like sometimes the huckleberry harvest can get out of hand in the summertime. Otherwise, I can't think of any plants that you could like really over super harvest or would want to, I guess.
Right. I mean, there are some rare plants in Montana that we know about, but I don't know that they're especially food sources or medicinal plants. But yeah. Well, everyone is giving you great thank yous, and it sounds like they wanted to hear you say thank you in Salish, and that could be a good ending.
Lem.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes, same to you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and